So what could a Nobel Prize-winning physicist possibly have in common with a kid who just loves fixing broken radios? Well, it turns out everything, if that physicist is Richard Feynman. Today, we're going to dive into the mind of a man whose genius wasn't just in his crazy complex equations, but in his relentlessly curious, playful, and, let's be honest, totally unconventional approach to pretty much everything. You know, this one phrase said to him at a super stuffy Princeton tea party, it just perfectly sums up the guy. He was always questioning assumptions, always bumping up against the rules. It even became the title of his famous book, because it just captures the essence of a mind that refused to think like everybody else. So this brings us to a question that really gets to the heart of it all. What is the actual difference between knowing the name of something and truly, deeply understanding it? This question basically drove Feynman's entire life, and his answer is powerful and, surprisingly, a whole lot of fun. And it all kicks off at a very proper party. All right, so to really get how Feynman thought, we gotta start with how he acted, and there is no better story to introduce you to him than the one that gave his book its title. Okay, picture this. Feynman is a brand new grad student at Princeton. He's been told it's this really elegant, formal place, almost like a fancy English school. So he makes a deal with himself. He's gonna be nice, he's gonna try to fit in. And then he finds himself at this super formal tea party hosted by the dean. So the dean's wife, Mrs. Eisenhart, is pouring the tea. She asks him this very simple, very polite question. But Feynman, his brain is just wired differently. He doesn't hear a social rule, he hears a choice of ingredients. And hey, both of them sound pretty good to him. And there it is, that polite little laugh. Feynman was totally confused. Joking? Why would that be a joke? It was only way later that he figured out that he was basically Princeton's secret code for, dude, you're making a social mistake. This is just a brilliant little window into his mind. He didn't just accept the rules, he had to figure them out from scratch, like they were another puzzle to solve. So, where did this totally unique way of thinking even come from? Well, it wasn't forged in some stuffy classroom, that's for sure. It was built in a childhood bedroom, surrounded by a bunch of broken parts and this incredible desire to see how things really worked. As a kid, Richard Feynman was just obsessed with tinkering. He'd buy these old busted radios for practically nothing and then spend hours and hours trying to bring them back to life. This wasn't just a hobby, you guys, it was his real education in how to think from the ground up. He learned by doing. And this process for fixing radios, it basically became his blueprint for solving any problem. You start simple, look for the obvious stuff, right? The loose wire. Then you just relentlessly attack the harder puzzle. And this is the most important part. If the tool you need doesn't exist, you just invent it. He wasn't just fixing radios, he was building a whole method for understanding the world. And this quote, man, it just says it all, doesn't it? For Feynman, learning wasn't about grades or getting a gold star. It was this obsessive, joyful chase to find a solution. It was a curiosity that was so relentless, he just couldn't quit until he'd figured the whole thing out. And this whole tinkering thing, it wasn't just for electronics. When he came across trigonometry in school, he found the standard symbols totally confusing. Like sin F looked to him like S times I times N times F. So what does he do? He just makes up his own symbols. He built his own mental tools because actually understanding it was way more important than just following the rules. This habit, this building his own tools thing, it gave him this incredible, almost unfair advantage. He taught himself a whole new way to solve integrals from this old book that most people didn't even know about. So when everyone else got stuck with their normal methods, they'd come to Feynman. He'd pull out his special tool and boom, it worked. It just proves this powerful idea. Having a different perspective isn't just interesting, it can be a legit superpower. So this drive for true, deep understanding led to one of Feynman's most famous and honestly most cutting critiques, his whole idea of cargo cult science. It's just a brilliant takedown of what it means to have knowledge without any real understanding. The story kicks off in Brazil, where Feynman was a guest professor, and he noticed something that really bothered him. His students were getting perfect scores on their exams. They could recite definitions, they could spit back equations flawlessly, but, and this is a big but, when he asked them to actually apply that knowledge to a simple real-world situation, they were completely lost. For example, they could give you the textbook definition of light polarization, but if you ask them, hey, what would you actually see if you looked at the sky through a polarizing filter? Blank stares. They had memorized the words, the forms of knowledge, but they hadn't grasped the reality behind them at all. And this experience is what led him to coin this amazing term, cargo cult science. The name comes from this fascinating thing that happened after World War II. Some South Sea Islanders had seen these planes land with all this amazing cargo. After the war ended, they wanted the planes to come back. So what did they do? They built runways out of dirt, they lit fires along the sides, they even built a little hut with a guy inside wearing bamboo headphones. They copied the form perfectly, but of course, the planes never landed. They were missing the essential ingredient, real understanding. So this really gets to the core of it, right? On one side, you have real science, which is all about being totally honest with yourself, always doubting, and always pushing for real understanding. On the other side, you've got cargo cult science, which is just going through the motions. It's following the ritual, memorizing the words, but never actually touching the truth. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? How can we, get a little bit of that Feynman magic into our own heads and our own thinking? Well, it really just comes down to a few core principles. First up, play. Do things just for the sheer joy of figuring them out, like those broken radios. Next, build your own mental tools. If the way something is explained doesn't make sense to you, invent a new way to think about it. Prize understanding over names. Don't be like the students in Brazil. Knowing a word is useless if you don't know what it means in the real world. You gotta question everything. Be the person who asked for both cream and lemon because it seems like a good idea. And finally, don't be fooled by appearances. Learn to see past the bamboo runways of the world and look for what's actually real. And nothing captures this better than the story of the wobbling plate. He was just hanging out in the Cornell cafeteria, saw a plate wobble in a funny way, and he became completely obsessed with figuring out the physics behind it. When his colleague, another brilliant physicist, asked him what the practical importance of this was, Feynman's answer was just simple and perfect. He was just doing it for fun. And that little bit of fun, that playful curiosity, it led directly to the work that would win him the Nobel Prize. How cool is that? At the end of the day, the Feynman mindset isn't really about having a genius-level IQ. It's more like an invitation to approach the world with a relentless curiosity, a joyful sense of play, and an absolute refusal to be satisfied with just knowing the name of something when you could instead truly understand it. So the real question for all of us is this: in what part of our lives are we just building bamboo runways? And where could we start playfully tinkering just for the fun of it?